Now, before we'll start working on that winning condition or making sure that the same button can't be clicked multiple times, I want to work on that log that should be shown below this game board, because working on that will also allow us to improve the code of this application and the structure of the application. Because whilst everything might look great right now, we're actually on the edge of writing suboptimal React code, especially if we plan to add more features. Now, to show you what's suboptimal, let's add a new log component because we'll need that component anyways. So I'll add a new log.jsx file, and in there, a log component function, which of course is exported. And the idea behind this log component here is in the end that it simply outputs an ordered list with an ID of log for styling reasons, where we output information about the different turns we had in our game thus far, so that we can simply see which turns were taken by the different players whilst playing that game. And that, of course, means that we need to manage some dynamic array of turns here, an array that grows with every button click. And that, of course, means that we can't really manage that state here, because that information, which button was clicked, is generated here in the game board component. So we again need to lift state up to the app component, because that's the component that has access to both the game board and the log component, which I want to use here. And for that, of course, we should also import log from /components log.jsx. So we need to lift state up, and therefore here we can use state to manage an array of turn data. And here we could then have our game turns and a set game turns function. And now, whenever a square was selected, we want to add a new turn to this array. Now, conveniently, we got this handle select square function here, so therefore in there we can call set game turns, and now we just need some information about the turn that took place. But before we make sure that this information gets here, let's pause for a second. Does this approach make sense? Because after all, we also got another place where we're storing information about the turns that already took place, at least in some way, and that's the game board component. Here we are updating our game board, and we do that for every click on a button. So of course, with that game board, we are in the end reflecting the different turns that took place. We just don't know in which order they were clicked, but we know that this button was clicked and this button was clicked, and we know which player clicked which button. So we already got a lot of information stored in this state here. And adding a new state to store kind of the same information, just with a little bit of extra data, is something you typically wanna avoid as a React developer. And that will not always be easy and will also require some practice. And it's also not the end of the world if you start managing the same data with multiple states, but it is something you typically wanna avoid, and therefore we are going to avoid it here. So instead of adding this state and having this game board state here, it makes more sense to lift that state that manages the current information about the progress of our game up from the game board component to the app component. Because again, it's this app component that then has access to both the log, which needs this information, and to the game board component, which also needs information about the current state of the game. It is, however, now not the game board state that I want to lift up, because that state is missing information about the order in which these buttons were clicked, which is important information for the log. And I'll therefore comment out this game board state here. We could also delete it, but I'll keep it here for reference. And I'll instead switch to this game turns state here. Because as you will see, we can manage this information about these different button clicks as a list, and then derive both the information we need for the log as well as the information we need for the game board from such an array of game turns.